Now let's talk about CSS specificity. To understand specificity in CSS, you need to first understand what cascading is in CSS. If you search for the meaning of cascade, we see that it says a small waterfall, typically one of several that fall in stages down a steep rocky slope. So in the same way, CSS rules cascade down to the selectors from top to bottom. So here we have a division and we also have a paragraph inside that with some text inside it. So let's go to our CSS. Now here we will give some styles to the division. So we'll give it a color of red and we'll also text transform it to uppercase. So these are the two CSS rules that we are given for the division. And now if we go down here and we'll create some style for the same division and we'll set the color to say green, then we can see that the green color is being applied to this text. Now when the browser reads the CSS, it reads from top to bottom. So first it reads this universal selector and it applies these styles to the page, and then it comes to this division and it applies the red color and the text transform, and then it comes down to this division and it sees that it has a color of green, so it changes the color back to green. So this is how a CSS file is read by the browser. Here we can see an example of cascade in CSS. Now CSS specificity is the weight given to the selectors, which helps the browser to decide which of the CSS rules to be applied to the element. If you have same CSS specificity for different selectors, then the one that is written the last will be applied to the element. But if you have different CSS specificity, then the CSS declaration which has the highest specificity will be applied to the element. So let's delete all this CSS over here and let's see what are the CSS specificity values for different selectors. First of all, let's take a look at the universal selector. So the universal selector has the least specificity value. So let's give it a color of red. And here we can see all the text has the color of red. Now the type selector has a higher specificity value than the universal selector. So we can use an element selector to override the value of the universal selector. So we'll just type P over here and we'll set the color to green. And here we can see that this CSS declaration has overridden the declaration from the universal selector. So if we just cut this from here and if we'll paste it above the universal selector, even then we can see that this declaration is being applied to the element. That is because the type selector has a higher specificity value than the universal selector. So right now we can say that this has a value of 1 because we have one type selector over here. We can add more specificity by actually writing div p, which means that the paragraph inside the division should have this style applied. So we'll just type color orange, and now if we save this, we can see that the color has changed to orange because here we have a higher specificity than this p over here. So you can think of this as a value of 1 and this as a value of 2. Now the next selector we are going to see is class selectors. The class selectors have a higher specificity than the type selectors. So let's go to our HTML and we will add a class to our paragraph. So we'll type class my style, and now if you go ahead and target the class my style and we'll set the color to say blue, and now if I save this, we can see that the color has changed to blue. That is because class selectors have higher specificity value than type selectors. Now just like the type selectors, we can add more classes and add more specificity. The next selector is the ID selector. So it has a higher specificity than the class selectors. So let's go to our index.html and we will give an ID to this paragraph. So here we'll type ID my ID, and in our CSS we will target the ID my ID. Now if we'll set the color of this ID to say turquoise, and if I save this, we can see that the color has changed. That is because we have a higher specificity for our ID than the classes. Now one thing that has more specificity than the ID is inline CSS. So if we go to our HTML and if you write some inline CSS over here, so we'll just type style equals and we'll set the color to purple, and now if I save this, we can see that the color has changed to purple. That is because inline styles override every other styles in the CSS. So inline styles have a higher specificity than all the other selectors in CSS. Now if you want to override everything else and you want to have a specific style, then you can use the important keyword. So let's say we want to apply this declaration to the element. So here we can type exclamation important, and if I say this, we can see that the color has changed to green. That's because adding important keyword over here overrides all the other style declarations in the CSS. But now if you add important over here, then we can see that the color changes to orange. So this can now eventually become a var of importance. So it is always best to stay away from this important keyword. The important keyword can cause more problems and confusion in your code. If you have a long CSS file and you have set some property to important, and when you want to change it somewhere else in your code, you can get confused trying to debug the code. So try to stay away from the important keyword as well as the inline styles, and try to make your CSS code better with type, class and ID selectors. Now if you want to play more with the specificity value, then you can search for CSS Specificity Calculator on Google and click on this link over here, specificity.kigan.st, and you can calculate the specificity of your selectors over here. So here we can see we have an element over here and we have one more element over here, and then we have this pseudo class, and then we also have this pseudo element over here. So we have this calculated value over here. The ones that are on top are of the highest value, and then we have the lower value, and then we have the lowest value over here. And if we take a look at the second selector over here, we can see we have a UL, and we also have an ID, and then we have an LI, and then we have a class. So here we can see we have an ID, we have a class, and we have two elements. So this clearly has a higher specificity than this one over here because it has an ID. So you can go ahead and write your own selectors over here and calculate the specificity values. Alright, so that's basically it for this video. See you in the next one.